some static on your line. Give me a 2 count. 1, 2. Just, oh, there it goes. It's gone. There it goes. It's gone. It's gone now. And there you are. Thank you for being here. This is Now. And I'm Elliot. We're broadcasting or streamcasting live on Facebook and on YouTube on this Friday. Thank you for joining us. It has been a rugged week. Very rugged, depending on where you are, particularly if you're in the cities of Dayton, Ohio, or El Paso, Texas. 31 killed, many more injured in a pair of mass shootings happening only 13 hours apart. And those killings happening just a week after another mass shooting in the California area, of course, at the Garlic Festival. What's going on? What are we going to do here? Most recently, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says we're going to try and investigate it, or at least try to address the issue of expanded background checks, which would close the gun show loophole in many other areas as well, and get us at least on the road to comprehensive gun reform. The president, for his part, has said the same. He's said he's willing to look at it. That's pretty close to a quote. But do they really mean it? Do they have a solution? We'll have to see. But what we're hoping to do tonight is get some of your solutions. Find out what you'd like to do in this situation. Some of the common sense solutions that we always hear from people just like yourself, the average Joe and Jane, so to speak. Sometimes that's where the best ideas come from. To help us do that, we welcome our guest this evening, Reverend Graylin Hagler, who is the senior pastor at Plymouth Congregational here in Washington, D.C. Reverend Graylin Hagler, good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Great to see you.
Good to see you too. You know, it's been a really crazy week for all of us. I'm sure that you've heard from your congregation and many of the people that you minister to and many of the people that you work with, because again, you are also, I might add, with that social and political activists. So you run into a lot of people. What are your initial thoughts going into this, and what is it that you think we should be doing going forward?
Well, the initial thoughts that I had to deal with on last Sunday morning, which was, again, to absorb the whole trauma of it, the trauma of these mass killings taking place back to back and then within a week of a previous mass killing, but also the trauma that brings alive the type of killing that goes on every day in cities all across the United States, like in Chicago, Baltimore, here in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that we never have dealt with or are able to deal with, it seems, is this fixation that we have with guns. And particularly as the gun technology has increased and gun availability has increased, and more people are able to get their hands on weapons of serious and mass destruction, we're seeing more and more of these mass killings. In fact, we've had more mass killings than we've had days in the year. And that should throw up alarm bells, send off alarm bells for anybody in their right thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of schools of thought here, and I've said this to a lot of people. And I say the simple solution, and nothing is terribly simple. This and would involve a lot of twists and turns, but it seems to me that every person who commits these mass shootings, or at least most of them, there's a couple of common denominators. And one is that they're able to, get their hands on a high-powered weapon, something that is totally destructive and not meant for hunting or anything else other than killing. And they also seem to have some kind of mental disability, some mental issue that causes them to do this. And it would seem to me that the simple matter would be to separate the two, in the sense that every background check, and you can do enhanced background checks. We do a lot of background checks now, but the only thing that we need to do is close that gun show loophole. But if, along with background checks, everybody had to submit to a mental health evaluation, which would be recurrent. You would have to stay on top of it every year or so, every 2 years, because I may not be disturbed now, but in 6 months I may be disturbed. And in that way, we could at least sift out or separate the people who have obvious mental difficulties and say, no, this person is not going to get a gun. Flag them in the system, and when they went for the background check, it would prevent them from being married with that assault weapon that we find is so difficult. Does that make sense to you at all? Does any of that make sense?
It makes some sense. I mean, I think that one of the things we want to go down the road right away when something like El Paso happened and sort of talk about mental illness. Well, maybe hatred is a mental illness. But one thing that is sure is that there has been a whole culture of white warriors that have been created. White warriors that are lone wolves most of the time, that walk into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and kills parishioners, go into a Walmart and kill people because they're Mexican. I mean, if we're going to say that racism is a mental illness, then we can say that. But I think that there's something that belies all this, and that is that we have been very much conditioned as a culture to glorify guns and to glorify weaponry of superiority. And we've done that basically personally, and we've also done that nationally. The idea of who gets the biggest gun nationally is the one that dominates the world. Who has the nuclear weapon is the one that dominates the world. And come back in a very individualized way. We talk about the assault weapons with high capacity clips, able to mow down people in a little bit of no time. I mean, that again becomes a weapon of superiority and in a sense, invincibility. And so linked with hatred, linked with white supremacy, linked with mental illness, linked with the misogynistic nature, we see basically firearms used to either bring some type of sense of resolution to a situation, or to strike a blow, like it was meant to strike a blow in El Paso and in other places, or even in Charlottesville. I mean, with the car and Haya being killed. I mean, these are the types of things that we have to look at. There is this seething anger that exists right now in the United States of America. It's not new; it's been here for a while. But that, with guns and being exacerbated through the rhetoric, we basically create a very combustible mixture.
Without a doubt. And you said something at the beginning that struck home with me, because I've tried to argue this point with a number of people, that the sheer fact that you commit murder seems to me to be some level of mental illness. I mean, a lot of us, just like we get angry, there are some people and some things I could probably even say that I hate. But do I act upon them? No. And many people don't. And the fact that the difference between not acting on it and going out and picking up a gun or stealing a gun or going through the trouble to buy one when you're not really eligible to have one, and going out and shooting dozens of people, has got to be some level of mental illness, is it not?
Some level. If we talk about mental illness as being sort of ill at ease with the conditions and things around you, then we can talk about it as mental illness. I think that there has been a whole class of warriors that have been created, out of the very divisive and hostile rhetoric. People who really feel in their own lives displaced, and therefore have been directed or feel that they're directed to deal with that displacement, to lash out because of that displacement, and to go after those who are brown, go after those who are black, particularly, all of these kinds of things. But we need to understand that weapons have fit in very often with this idea of fear, devices, hostile rhetoric, people.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, it was used so-called in the founding of this nation. It was used in terms of the extermination of Native folks. It was used in terms of, I'm talking about firearms, talking about weaponry, used in the maintenance of enslavement system in this country. It has been used to put down labor strikes. It has been used to fight immigrants. It has been used for all these things throughout history. So in some ways, what we're dealing with is not necessarily a new manifestation. It's just that the technology has advanced and the body count is higher.
No doubt, no doubt. And what many of the people that I talk to would generally say, geez, if we were able, and I want to stick with this idea of mental health, they say, well, if we were to put more money in our mental health system, that would create that would solve half the problem, or maybe even more than half the problem. If we were to take all the guns off the street, that would solve the problem. In your opinion, is it worth it for these extremes, or is it just something within ourselves, as human beings, that needs to be corrected?
Well, it starts with something that's within ourselves. To be at peace with yourself and to understand the sacredness of not only yourself but other human beings around you. That's one thing. Number two is that there's some practical solutions. I mean, one is identity checks.
Is it worth it for these extremes, or is it? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And number two is that we need to really, I think you can ban assault weapons. Why do you need assault weapons within the society, within the culture? You don't hunt with assault weapons. And you also basically ban high-capacity clips. You don't need that as well, or any other kind of modification kit that modifies a weapon in such a way that it becomes an assault weapon. I think all of those things can be looked at and banned because there is absolutely no need for them within civilized society. The other thing is it starts in our school to begin to change the thinking. Instead of glorifying war, let us glorify peacemaking. Instead of glorifying guns and pioneer and all of that, let us glorify the rich culture that existed and exists in this land even before Europeans arrived. Let us look at those things again, in a sense, to reprogram rather from away from the sort of idea of the glories of war to somehow peacemaking and to change perspective of young people so that young people as peacemakers become older people as peacemakers. Instead of those who lash out with guns, they may lash out in conversation. And that's what you have happen.
Okay, let me just you, if you're listening there in front of your computer, in front of your PC or your device, if you have an opinion, if you have a solution for this, we'd like to hear it. 443-505-7560, 443-505-7560. Call now and register. Put your hat in the ring. Be heard and get it off your chest, so to speak. It's been a really difficult week, and I think everybody has a way around this. If we sort of come together and put our heads together, we would have some solution, maybe. The other side of this coin is the political atmosphere. We see a Senate that is unwilling to do the things that their constituents want in most ways. They're focused on keeping their job, so to speak. And in doing so, they think the right way to go is to, as they say, defend the Second Amendment, but in the background, adhere to some of the principles of the NRA. And when I say the NRA, the National Rifle Association, I'm talking about the membership. The membership, by and large, is on board with many of these changes and on board with enhanced background checks and so forth, because these are people who, in this society, we have people who use guns in very constructive ways for sport, for defense, and for their occupation. And that's just fine. Nobody's arguing that, of course. Those people have the same sense that many of us do, but it's that NRA administration that's looking to keep their pockets lined, so to speak, with gun manufacturers and sell as many and put as many guns out in the streets as they possibly can and make money behind it. Of course, as you probably heard, the NRA's in trouble these days. There's a lot of infighting going on. There's been a lot of changes at the top. Financially, they are strapped. I think a lot of that had to do with the Parkland kids earlier in the year who had their own tragedy and rose to the occasion, fighting the NRA. And I think they put a dent in things, and the NRA is vulnerable right now. But I'm not quite sure that the administration is in a position or even willing to take advantage of that of the position that the NRA is in right now. Would you say that's close?
Well, and that's close. That's right on point. And I think that one of the things to emphasize that really strongly suggests, and I believe that it's true, that our political leaders are bought and paid for by the gun lobby, by the NRA, and that's a shame. Because every time we've had something, there's been an outpouring of sympathy. There's been prayers. There's been vigils. There's been people and young people as well as older people saying that something needed to be done. The reality is that mostly nothing was done. And that was because politicians and political leaders were afraid to lead because they were captive to their contributions and their scoring from the NRA. And I think my question right now is that whether they will have the courage or whether they will simply do the least symbolic thing in order to say they did something when in fact it did not do anything. I think that's a hard reality we're faced with every single time. That our political leadership has no backbone when it comes to this issue, has no urgency when it comes to this issue, and has basically abandoned the cries of the public each and every time.
Yeah. One of the reasons I was interested in talking with you about this, Graylin, and of course, the viewers should know we've known each other for years.
Yeah.
You're a long time through two cities, in fact. So, but what the viewers should know is that you're not just a minister and a reverend to many people in many cities, but you're also a social and political activist. But putting that aside for a second, the one reason I wanted to talk with you was that I thought, we've talked about this, my wife and I have talked, and I've talked with other people as well, and we think there's they call it, I'll use the hackneyed phrase for it, morally bankrupt. Is there something spiritually that we're missing as human beings in this day and age that somehow we lost over the years? Because people will always say, well, in the 60s and the 50s, it was this and it was that. And, it's not the way it used to be. Have we left something behind spiritually that we need to regain again?
Excuse me. One of the things that we've lost along the way, sorry about that, is a sense of principle. When I say principle, you don't make it up as you go along. Principle is something, if it applies over here as the truth, it applies over here as the truth. And what I'm getting at is that, for example, if you start screaming that you're pro-life, but on the other hand, you're in favor of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and people everywhere be having guns, well, then you're not pro-life. But sure, you've changed your principle somewhere along the way, right? And that's a part of it, is that we have gotten really conditioned into what I call situational ethics. It's like I point out right now, how can the evangelical church, that has been the police of morality for all of this time, going through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, somehow excuse all morality when it comes to this political climate right here, right now? To even sit there and be silent with children being separated at the border, all of those things lack in principle. I may not agree with your principle, but I'm saying have a principle. Agree with something from at point A as well as point L and as well as point Z. Don't just change it up because it's inconvenient for you now, and therefore you want what you want, and so you want to change now all this sense of morality, this sense of principle that you have. I think that's one of the things, is that we do not necessarily participate as a logical society, or as a society that respects the sacredness of every human being. When I say the sacredness of every human being, if I see my brother or my sister or my neighbor or the stranger as someone that is divine and made in the image of the Creator, then how dare me try to harm that person in any form, shape, or fashion, because that would be like harming the Creator. As it says in one of the epistles, the Epistle of John, it says, how can you claim to love God who you have not seen, but hate your brother or your sister that you have seen? And it sort of points out the contradictions of humankind all the time in the ways we approach life and the way we approach each other. And so we're reminded that we have really lost a value system, our sense of morality, and even our sense of ethics, floating along where we're floating at right now. And we need to turn around and get it back.
Good point. 443-505-7560, 443-505-7560 if you want to get in on some of this conversation and register your thoughts and some of your solutions. Going forward, what do you, this is the looking in the crystal ball thing, and it's never very accurate for most of us. But I think it's a good exercise, at least for our, and we're just talking about spiritual well-being, because we've all got to have hope. What do you see going forward? You see us coming to a solution on this? I mean, it's interesting, because when people talk about the turning point, the tipping point, we thought Sandy Hook with the dozens of children, young children that were murdered there. We thought that would be a turning point. It wasn't. They've been talking all week. Two murders, two mass shootings within 13 hours, one a week before that. This has got to be a turning point. It doesn't feel like it's going to be. Some people will say, you hate to go there, but people in search of and hunting for some solution. Say, well, if this came to the legislator's doorstep, if this fell on their doorstep, then we'd see some movement forward. But nobody wishes that. As unfortunate as that may be, that might not even be a turning point. Do you see a turning point going forward? And if so, what would it be? When would it be?
I think there's a perfect storm that is coming together. And that storm has to do with an election that's coming up after all of this divisive and hostile language that has been out there, the attacks upon people of color, upon people south of the border, upon people trying to come across the border, attacks upon even particularly women that are known as the Squad, which is very symbolic of the diversity of the country. One of Palestinian background, one who was born in Somalia and therefore a Somalian African American. As we sort of look at the whole diversity of this gathering, one Puerto Rican. And so this is the diversity. What went on and has gone on to bring those women of color to office has been an electorate that has gotten very riled up in terms of the misogynistic rhetoric that has gone on from this administration. Mm-hmm. And I think at this point, what people are going to do, people are going to remember not only the violence that has taken place in the concentration camps on the southern border, but the violence that took place at the hands of an avowed white supremacist in El Paso, Texas, and even the violence that has taken place in Dayton, Ohio, all of the things that have been said and all of the profanity that has been used and utilized. And I think you're looking at a perfect storm that actually may sweep into office people who got some backbone, some courage, and some direction to do something.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to be coming in just a little over 450 days we have. And no hope for anybody to replace the current administration, which I would assume would have to be changed for any of this to move forward and for any of that to come to fruition with what you just said.
I just want to remind people of another thing that I've been talking about lately. We've talked about people in the street in Puerto Rico that asked the governor to step down. Mm-hmm. Puerto Rico is a colony, and therefore the governor was tantamount to being the president of Puerto Rico. And the people therefore toppled a government that they, through nonviolent means.
Yeah, wasn't that crazy? That was great. And we as soon as we saw that, we thought, oh, that's what needs to happen here.
Right, that's how you do it. That's exactly how you do it. And unfortunately, we have not been thinking like that in terms of that all you need is people power, not destructive people power, but committed people power that could slow down and change a government, that could make some demands upon the government and make sure that the government is the government of we the people, mm-hmm. and not we the elite, but we the people.
And you know, I'm sorry, go ahead, finish your thought.
Yes, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's funny because the way that happened was, if you recall, the Roseo apparently some notes and messages and emails that they had written that were disparaging to many people and just offensive, plain old offensive, got out. And we thought, we've been talking about this for a while, and the way the president's proclivity to play on the Twitter machine, so to speak, we thought eventually has got to get him in trouble. And so the parallels are kind of eerie. Have you ever seen a movie called Facing the Crowd?
I don't think I have.
Okay, I'll talk to you about it offline. But essentially, there's a character there who rises to the heights of stardom, and then has a precipitous falling when he happens to show his true self in the electronic medium in the 50s. And so we always call that, the character's name was Lonesome Rhodes. We always call it the Lonesome Rhodes moment. But we think eventually. You play with that Twitter, you play with that fire, and it's going to burn you eventually. But gosh, I mean, that the parallels are just too similar.
And it was used as kindling, because that's really what it was. The media reported that it was that. When the issue had to do with a whole lot of economic concerns, that they were rising up against the conservative Rosselló government. Not only economic, they had an austerity control board on them, so to speak, still do. all of those types of things, an economy that went bust because of those types of austerity programs. And so you had people rise up and say, no more, we're not taking any more. Here you are, joking, having a disdain for the people of Puerto Rico, even though you claim to be Puerto Rican, and therefore we're going to remove you from office. And so that was an important thing to do. And so when we look at what's going on right now in our country, with this person in the White House and this person in the Senate, basically these folks, they represent a segment of the population, but I doubt if they represent Americans. And if they represent Americans, then I must be really wrong about what America is, because I don't think that they represent even the faction that they claim to represent.
No, they don't.
It's a matter of holding on to power and therefore ramming down our throats everything that they choose to ram down our throats economically, socially, and politically.
Absolutely. Absolutely, without a doubt. Before we end, I just wanted to, we haven't talked in a while. What are you up to these days?
Well, I've been doing a lot of work around Palestine and the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign. It's caught on around the world, and it's taken a lot of heat here in the United States, and trying to lift that up and talk about issues having to do with really what I call global racism, global white supremacy, not only in this country, but in many, many places around the world. We see it really in the news right now. And also we see that taking place in Israel is an apartheid state. And so I've been working to really sort of try to take head on the issues around the apartheid state and get people to realize that's what it is.
All right, very good. Well, listen, this has been a joy. We haven't spoken in a long time. We used to do this on a regular basis, so it's been too long, and we're going to have to do this again real soon. You're on social media? Oh, did we lose him? No, he just froze there for a second. There you go. There you go. Anywhere people can find you on social media?
Sure. I'm on Twitter as Graylan Hagler, altogether, GraylanHagler. And the same thing on Facebook, Graylan Hagler. There is also the church's webpage, which is plymouth-ucc.org. They can find me in those places.
All right, very good. Reverend Graylan Hagler with Plymouth Congregation in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your insight tonight, and have a great weekend. All right, thank you. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here for this half hour. It is now, we're here every Friday at 7. We thank you for joining us. Spread the word if you can. Like us on Facebook and on YouTube. And if you care to, please join us again next week and have a great week. We'll see you then. Take care.